The Japanese machine gunner in the cave is still laughing when Private Eddie Kowalski squeezes the trigger. You can hear it echo off the coral walls, high-pitched, mocking, the same sound that's followed the flamethrower teams for 3 days across Peleliu. They've heard it from every ridge, every bunker, every spider hole. The enemy thinks the M2 flamethrower is a joke. The laughter stops at 8 seconds when the fuel reaches the back of the cave. By 10 seconds, the screaming starts. By 15, there's only the sound of fire eating oxygen and Eddie Kowalski vomiting into the volcanic ash. Eddie Kowalski is 22 years old, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he's been carrying 70 pounds of jellied gasoline on his back for 6 days. Before the war, he worked in his father's butcher shop on the South Side. He joined the Marines because his older brother Tommy did, and Tommy came home in a box from Guadalcanal with a medal and no face. Eddie figured he owed something. He didn't think it would be this. His assistant gunner is Ray Chen, 19, from San Francisco, whose parents run a laundry on Grant Avenue that the government seized when they were sent to Manzanar. Ray volunteered anyway. Doesn't talk about it much. Carries an extra canteen for Eddie because the flamethrower tank sits where a pack should be, and you need water to survive on Peleliu. The island is Hell's geology class. Razor-sharp coral, volcanic rock that holds heat like a skillet, and 115-degree temperatures that cook you from the inside out. The rest of the squad keeps 10 yards back when Eddie moves forward. Flamethrower men are bullet magnets. The Japanese know what that cylindrical tank means, and every sniper on the island has orders to take out the flame teams first. Pop the tank, and the man becomes a Roman candle. They've all seen it happen. Eddie's predecessor lasted 45 minutes on the beach before a Nambu round found his fuel line. They couldn't identify what was left. The weapon itself is a cruel piece of engineering. The M22 flamethrower. 2 vertical tanks, 4 gallons of napalm thickened with gasoline, pressurized by nitrogen, with an effective range of 20 to 40 yards depending on wind. In practice, you get maybe 10 good bursts before you're empty and defenseless. The thing weighs as much as a small person, throws your balance off, and makes you walk like a hunchback. The wand, they call it the gun, is a 6-foot steel tube with a squeeze grip igniter. When it works, it shoots a stream of liquid fire. When it doesn't, which is often, you're standing in front of an enemy position holding expensive kindling. They practice on empty pillboxes in the morning before the heat becomes unbearable. Eddie learns to lead the stream, to walk the fire into openings, to listen for the change in sound when fuel hits concrete versus flesh. You don't aim a flamethrower, you paint with it. The other Marines watch from a distance, faces impassive, smoking captured Japanese cigarettes that taste like burning hair. Nobody makes jokes about the flame teams. At night, Eddie and Ray dig their foxhole deeper than regulation. They've heard stories from Tarawa, from Saipan. Japanese infiltrators hunting flamethrower men in the dark, knowing they can't risk firing that weapon near their own lines. Eddie sleeps with his M1 carbine loaded, one hand on the grip. Ray takes first watch. They don't talk about what they've burned. There's no vocabulary for it. The briefing comes on September 21st, 1944. Captain Morrison, face sunburned to leather, points at a hand-drawn map of the Umur-Brogol ridges. The Japanese call it the Point. The Marines are starting to call it Bloody Nose Ridge. Intelligence says the enemy has fortified over 500 cave positions in the coral limestone, connected by tunnels, reinforced with concrete and steel rails from the phosphate mining operation. Standard tactics aren't working. Artillery bounces off. Naval bombardment just rearranges the rocks. The Japanese pop out, fire, and disappear back into the earth like vengeful ghosts. That's where you come in, Morrison says, looking at Eddie. We need to burn them out. Eddie nods. Ray doesn't. He's been keeping count, 4 flamethrower operators have died in the last 3 days. The lifespan is now measured in hours, not days. At 6:30 on September 24th, they move out. The jungle at the base of the ridges is different from the beach. Dense, wet, choked with vegetation that hasn't seen sunlight in centuries. Vines thick as rope. Trees with roots like grasping fingers. And everywhere, the smell. Rotting vegetation, human waste, death that's been composting for weeks. You can taste it in your water. The first cave entrance appears at 0715. Dark mouth in the coral, maybe 6 feet high, 4 feet wide. Silent. Too silent. Eddie can feel eyes on him from somewhere in that darkness. He unslings the flamethrower, checks the pressure gauge. Nitrogen's good. Ray moves up beside him with the M1, covering the approach. Behind them, Sergeant Powell and 3 riflemen fan out. That's when they hear it. Laughter, high and sharp, echoing from the cave. Then words in English. "Flame boy, come, come, we wait for you." Eddie's hands are shaking. He grips the wand tighter. "It's a trap," Ray whispers. "They're all traps," Eddie says. Eddie moves forward, each step deliberate, watching for tripwires and pressure plates in the coral rubble. The flamethrower sloshes on his back, liquid death waiting for a spark or a bullet, 15 yards from the cave mouth. The laughter continues, bouncing off stone, impossible to pinpoint. They've learned to mock in English, probably from captured phrasebooks or interrogations. Psychological warfare at its most intimate. 10 yards. Eddie can see deeper into the darkness now. The cave turns left about 20 feet in. Perfect ambush geometry. Ray is breathing hard beside him, M1 Garand at his shoulder, scanning the jungle edges. The rest of the squad has taken cover behind a fallen tree. Weapons trained on the cave and the ridge above. 5 yards. The laughter stops. Eddie brings the wand up, aims at the cave mouth, and squeezes the igniter trigger. The pilot flame catches with a soft pop. He counts to 3, standard procedure, let them hear it coming, let fear do its work, then squeezes the main trigger. The stream erupts. Not a spray, but a coherent tongue of orange and black, arcing through the air with a sound like tearing canvas. It hits the cave entrance and splashes. That's the first surprise. Napalm doesn't flow like water. It sticks, it climbs, it finds every crack and follows every air current deeper into the earth. For 3 seconds, nothing. Just fire licking at coral and smoke beginning to pour from the opening. Eddie keeps the stream going, walking it left and right across the entrance, sealing it with flame. 4 seconds. 5. 6. Then, banzai. They come from the jungle, not from the cave, from behind, from the sides. 7 Japanese soldiers, maybe 8, erupting from spider holes camouflaged with palm fronds and volcanic ash. The whole cave was bait. Eddie spins, the flamethrower throwing him off balance, and sees a soldier with a samurai sword raised, running straight at him, face twisted in a battle scream that's more animal than human. Ray fires. The M1's crack is thunder sharp in the wet jungle air. The soldier drops. Ray works the bolt, fires again. Another soldier goes down. Eddie tries to bring the flamethrower around, but the wand is too long, too unwieldy for close quarters. A Japanese private with an Arisaka rifle lunges from the right. Eddie swings the wand like a club, catches him in the ribs. The man goes down, scrambles back up. Sergeant Powell's Thompson submachine gun opens up, stitching a line across 2 more attackers. The jungle fills with smoke and the smell of cordite and blood. Eddie sees a grenade sailing through the air toward him. Type 97, distinctive pineapple shape. And his body makes a decision his brain hasn't processed yet. He dives left, still connected to 70 pounds of fuel, hits the ground hard enough to crack a rib. The grenade explodes where he was standing. Shrapnel sings through the air, punches holes in leaves, thunks into tree trunks. Ray grunts, staggers, keeps firing. Blood spreads across his left shoulder, but his hands don't shake. 3 rounds, 4. The last attacker falls. Silence. The terrible silence after contact, broken only by someone's ragged breathing. Eddie realizes it's his own. He rolls to his knees, checks the flamethrower tanks. No punctures, no leaks. Impossible luck. Ray, I'm good. Through and through. Ray's face is white, but his voice is steady. Check the cave. Eddie looks. The fire at the entrance has died down to sullen orange flames, but smoke is still pouring out. Thick, black, chemical smoke from burning napalm and whoever, is burning inside. Then he sees it. Movement in the darkness beyond the flames. A figure stumbling forward, wreathed in fire, arms outstretched. Human torch. The screaming reaches them half a second before the smell. Burning hair, burning cloth, burning meat. Eddie's stomach lurches. He turns away, vomits into the coral rocks. Nothing comes up but bile and morning coffee. The screaming continues for what feels like an hour, but is probably 30 seconds. Then stops. The figure collapses just inside the cave mouth, still burning. There's more, Sergeant Powell says. He's pointing at the cave. Listen. Eddie listens. Under the crackle of dying flames, he hears it. Voices. Japanese voices, high-pitched with panic, echoing from deeper in the cave system. They're not laughing now. They're trapped. The tunnel turns, which means the fire didn't reach them directly. But the smoke. You can't hide from smoke. It follows every passage, fills every chamber. They'll come out, Ray says. He's wrapping his shoulder with a field dressing, one-handed, teeth holding the gauze. Give them a minute. A minute passes, 2. Then, surrender. We surrender. The voice comes from inside the cave, English broken but clear. Eddie looks at Sergeant Powell. The sergeant shakes his head. Could be a trick. Keep eyes on that entrance. Surrender, please, we come out. Eddie can hear coughing now. Violent, wet coughing. Smoke inhalation. The kind that tears your lungs apart. He's seen it before. Men drown on dry land, suffocating on their own fluid-filled lungs. Come out slowly. Sergeant Powell shouts. Hands up, no weapons. Movement in the smoke. A figure emerges, hands raised, face blackened with soot. Young, maybe 17. Uniform singed, eyes streaming tears from the smoke. He stumbles forward, falls to his knees, keeps his hands up. Behind him, 2 more. One is helping the other walk, then another, 5 in total. The machine gunner who was laughing isn't among them. Eddie knows why. The one who burned at the entrance was probably him. The Marines zip-tie their hands with practiced efficiency. The Japanese soldiers don't resist. One of them looks at Eddie, at the flamethrower, and his face shows something beyond fear. Recognition of what almost happened. What did happen to his comrades deeper in the cave, in the chambers they can't see from here. Cave secure, Powell reports into the radio. 5 prisoners, continuing to Objective Baker. They move forward. Eddie's legs feel like rubber. He can still smell burning human flesh in his nostrils, taste it in the back of his throat. Ray walks beside him, blood soaking through the shoulder dressing, but he won't go back to the aid station. You don't leave your partner, not with a flamethrower. The next cave is 200 yards north, higher up the ridge. Larger entrance, reinforced with logs and salvaged steel. This one doesn't laugh. They've heard what happened to the first position, and word travels fast in these tunnel complexes. Eddie can see faces in the darkness, just glimpses, white ovals in the black. They're watching, waiting. He aims the wand, squeezes the trigger. The second burst is longer than the first. 10 seconds of sustained flame, painting the entrance, forcing fire deep into the tunnel. The napalm sticks to wood and steel, burns at over 1,000 degrees, creates its own wind as it consumes oxygen. Eddie walks the stream left and right, up and down, methodical as a painter. This time there's no ambush, just the sound of fire and the beginning of screams. 30 seconds after he stops firing, they start coming out. 3, 5, 8, 12. Some are on fire, rolling in the dirt to extinguish their uniforms. Some are blackened with smoke, but untouched by flames. Some are helping others who can't walk. Eddie counts 16 before he stops counting. Sergeant Powell's squad moves in, securing them, administering first aid to the ones who aren't too far gone. One Japanese soldier, officer's insignia burned off his collar, looks at Eddie as they lead him away. Says something in Japanese, urgent, repeated. "What's he saying?" Powell asks. Private Yamamoto, their Nisei interpreter, translates. He says there are more caves. Many more, connected. He wants us to know they'll all come out. Don't burn them. Eddie doesn't know what to say to that. He's not in charge of strategy. He just carries the fire. They continue working up the ridge, cave after cave. Some surrender after the first burst. Some fight. One position has a machine gun nest that fires until the last second before the flames reach them, covering the escape of soldiers through a back tunnel. Eddie takes a round through his canteen, 6 inches from his spine. Ray gets another wound, this time in the leg. Keeps going anyway. By 1400 hours, they've cleared 9 cave positions. Eddie has used 4 complete tanks of napalm. His back is screaming from the weight. His hands are blistered from handling the hot wand. Ray can barely walk, but he refuses evacuation. The rest of the squad looks at them with something like awe and something like horror. At 1430, they reach the largest cave system yet. The entrance is 15 feet wide, 8 feet tall, reinforced with concrete. Intelligence says this is a command post. Battalion strength. Maybe 200 soldiers inside. Eddie can hear activity echoing from the depths. Voices, movement, equipment being positioned. They're not coming out. They're preparing to defend. Sergeant Powell calls for artillery support, for satchel charges, for anything but the flamethrower. But the angle's wrong for artillery. The entrance is too hardened for satchel charges. They've already tried. The captain's voice crackles over the radio. "Send in the flame team." Eddie looks at Ray. Ray looks back. They both know this is different. This isn't a cave. It's a fortress. And they're going to paint it with fire. Eddie triggers the igniter, but his hands are shaking so badly he nearly drops the wand. Ray steadies him with his good arm, shoulder, and leg wounds bleeding through the dressings. They're both running on adrenaline and something beyond exhaustion. A place where your body keeps functioning after your mind has shut down. The burst that hits the command post entrance is the longest Eddie has fired. 20 seconds of sustained flame, draining an entire tank. The napalm pours into that concrete mouth like liquid hell, sticking to walls, ceiling, floor, following air currents deeper than Eddie can see. The heat is so intense, he has to back away, face blistering even at 15 yards. The concrete begins to crack from thermal stress. Steel support beams glow red. The screaming starts immediately. Not one voice or 10. Dozens. Overlapping, echoing, impossible to distinguish individual agony from collective horror. Eddie drops the wand, backs away further, hands over his ears. It doesn't help. You can't unhear something like that. Ray sits down hard, stares at nothing. They come out 30 seconds later. Not soldiers anymore. Moving torches, human shapes wrapped in fire, running blindly toward anything that might be relief. Some make it 3 steps, Some make it 10. One makes it all the way to the tree line before collapsing. The Marines shoot them. It's mercy, faster than fire. Nobody questions it. When the flames die down enough to approach, they count 47 bodies at the entrance, burned beyond recognition. Corpsman Wilson, who's 23 and was pre-med at UCLA, checks each one anyway. Training overrides horror. He finds 3 still alive, barely. Burns over 90% of their bodies. He administers morphine, enough to ease the pain, enough to ensure they won't wake up again. Don't, Eddie says. His voice sounds strange to his own ears, distant, underwater. They're gone already, Wilson says quietly. This is kindness. More emerge over the next hour. Stumbling out through the smoke, hands raised, calling surrender in Japanese and broken English. 73 in total. 15 dead from smoke inhalation. 28 with severe burns. The rest suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning and terror that transcends language. The battalion strength command post has been reduced to a smoking tomb. Ray finally accepts evacuation when he faints from blood loss. They carry him down on a stretcher, still clutching his M1 Garand. Eddie watches him go, feeling nothing. Numbness has replaced everything else. They give Eddie a replacement assistant gunner, Private Martinez from Chicago, 18 years old, fresh off the transport that morning. Kid looks at the flamethrower like it's a dragon that needs feeding. Eddie doesn't have the energy to reassure him. Just shows him how to carry the spare fuel tanks and stay out of the kill zone. That night, Eddie sits in his foxhole and stares at his hands. They're blistered, blackened with soot, shaking with tremors he can't control. Sergeant Powell brings him food. Eddie can't eat. Everything tastes like smoke and burning meat. He tries to sleep. The screaming follows him into dreams. Private Yamamoto comes by around midnight, sits on the edge of Eddie's foxhole without asking. They don't talk for a while, just exist in the darkness together. The officer I translated earlier, Yamamoto finally says. The one who said they'd surrender. He had letters in his pocket. Wife and 2 daughters in Osaka. Picture of them at a cherry blossom festival. He pauses. I burned the picture before anyone else could see it. Thought you should know. Eddie nods. Doesn't trust his voice. They're teaching their soldiers that Americans don't take prisoners. Yamamoto continues. That we torture and mutilate. That's why they won't come out until the fire reaches them. They think burning is better than what we'll do to them. That's not true. I know. You know. They don't. And now? Yamamoto gestures vaguely toward the ridge, toward the cave system still smoking in the darkness. Now they have proof we burn people alive. So they'll fight harder, die rather than surrender, and we'll have to burn more of them. Eddie thinks about the machine gunner laughing, about how that laughter stopped, about the officer with the picture, about the kid from Texas they buried yesterday who'd been in country for 6 hours. How do you live with it? Eddie asks. Yamamoto is quiet for a long time. You don't, he finally says. You just keep moving forward until the war ends, or you do. Then you try to become someone else. The casualty report comes through at 300. Ray Chen died in surgery. Fragment of the leg wound had nicked an artery, bled out internally while they were trying to patch the shoulder. Eddie reads the report 3 times before it registers. His assistant gunner, his water carrier, the kid from San Francisco whose parents lost everything. Dead from wounds that didn't seem that bad. Eddie walks to the regimental aid station. They won't let him see the body, already bagged, already processed. He stands outside the tent in the darkness and tries to remember Ray's face. Can only see him through smoke and fire. Can only hear his voice saying, I'm good, through and through. At dawn, Captain Morrison finds Eddie cleaning the flamethrower. Methodical, automatic, hands moving through maintenance routines while his mind is somewhere else. "I'm sending you back to battalion," Morrison says. "You've done your time." "I'm fine, sir." "You're not. You can't be. Nobody could be." Morrison crouches down, makes eye contact. "We've got more flame teams coming up. Replacements. You've shown them how it's done. That's enough." "How many did we kill yesterday?" Eddie asks. Morrison hesitates. "Preliminary estimates say 237 enemy casualties, possibly more in the deeper tunnels." 237. Eddie tries to picture it. Can't. The number is too large, too abstract. He can only see individuals. The one who burned at the first cave entrance. The officer with the letters. The ones who came out still burning, whom they shot as mercy. The official report will say the flamethrower was highly effective at clearing fortified positions. Morrison continues. It will recommend expanded use in future operations. It will probably save American lives. He pauses. None of that changes what it costs. Eddie nods. Understands that Morrison is trying to give him something, context, justification, meaning. It doesn't help. Nothing helps. They pack up his gear. Someone else will carry the flamethrower now. Martinez, probably, with a new assistant gunner who doesn't know yet what the weapon does, what it costs to use it. Eddie walks down the ridge with his M1 carbine and a duffel bag, past caves still smoking, past aid stations full of Japanese prisoners with burns and smoke-scarred lungs, past the Graves registration tent, where they're still identifying bodies when there's enough left to identify. At the battalion CP, they give him hot food and coffee. He sits in the shade of a camouflage net and watches Marines prepare for the next push. Young faces, clean uniforms, weapons that haven't been fired yet. They look at him, mud-caked, smoke-stained, eyes that don't quite focus, and give him space. They know. You can always tell who's been in it and who hasn't. A chaplain stops by, asks if Eddie wants to talk. Eddie declines. What would he say? That he committed technically legal murder? That he can still smell burning flesh? That he sees it when he closes his eyes and hears it when he's silent? The chaplain means well, but there's no absolution for what a flamethrower does. The Japanese stopped laughing at American flamethrowers after Peleliu. Word spread through their defensive networks in the Philippines, on Iwo Jima, on Okinawa, about what the weapon could do, about how fire doesn't just kill but terrorizes, how it turns fortifications into ovens, how there's no defense except surrender or death. They developed new tactics in response. Deeper tunnels with multiple air shafts, water drums to fight fires, orders to shoot flamethrower operators on sight. The U.S. military learned different lessons. Flamethrowers worked. They cleared caves that artillery couldn't touch, bunkers that satchel charges couldn't crack. So they made more, improved the design, increased production. By Iwo Jima, every Marine rifle company had a flamethrower team. By Okinawa, they'd added armored flamethrower tanks. The weapon had proven its terrible efficiency. The after-action reports from Peleliu praised the flamethrower's effectiveness, noted its psychological impact on enemy morale, recommended expanding training and deployment. The statistics were impressive. Average of 15 to 20 enemy casualties per tank of napalm. Cave positions reduced in minutes that might have taken days to neutralize with conventional weapons. American casualties decreased when flame teams were properly employed. What the reports didn't capture was the cost to the men who carried the fire. Eddie Kowalski never carried a flamethrower again. They sent him back to the States in November 1944, medically discharged with what the paperwork called combat fatigue, what we'd now recognize as severe PTSD. He couldn't be around fire, couldn't smell gasoline without panic attacks, couldn't work in his father's butcher shop because the smell of meat reminded him of things he couldn't articulate. He died in 1963, age 41, of cirrhosis. Drank himself to death slowly, methodically, over 19 years. Never married. Never talked about the war. Except once in a VA hospital when someone asked what he'd done in the Pacific. "I burned people alive," he said. "That's what they gave me a medal for." The men who survived Peleliu rarely spoke about the flamethrowers. When they did, it was in hushed tones, with caveats. It was necessary. It saved lives. They wouldn't surrender. All true. None of it sufficient to carry the weight of what they'd witnessed or inflicted. The Geneva Conventions later addressed incendiary weapons, limited their use, called them inhumane. But in 1944, facing an enemy who would die by the hundreds rather than surrender, who turned every cave into a fortress and every battle into an attrition nightmare, the flamethrower seemed like the answer. A terrible answer, but an answer. The Pacific War was full of such answers. Flame against fortifications, napalm against cities, fire raids against Tokyo. Finally, nuclear fire against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Each escalation justified by the stubborn mathematics of war. Kill them faster than they kill you. Break their will to resist. Force surrender through overwhelming violence. The Japanese soldiers who survived flamethrower attacks, those who surrendered, who chose life over death in the flames, carried their own scars. Physical burns that never fully healed, respiratory damage from smoke inhalation, psychological wounds that Japanese culture had no framework to address. They returned to a country destroyed by fire from the air to match the fire they'd faced on the ground. Some spoke about it decades later, in the safety of old age, describing the sound of flames coming through tunnel systems, the impossible choice between burning and surrendering, the guilt of surviving when so many hadn't, the laughter at the first cave, the mocking challenge that Eddie heard before he squeezed the trigger, represented a fundamental misunderstanding of what modern war had become. The Japanese soldier who laughed expected honor, expected bravery to matter, expected that an American weapon would follow the same rules of warfare he'd been trained in. He learned, in the last seconds of his life, that war had moved beyond honor into pure efficiency. That's what the flamethrower represented. War stripped of ritual and reduced to function. No room for Bushido, no space for courage, just fire and the choice between dying by fire or surrendering. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't honorable. It was effective. And in the calculus of total war, effectiveness was all that mattered. But someone has to carry that effectiveness. Someone has to squeeze the trigger and watch flesh burn. Someone has to hear the screaming and smell the smoke and still come back the next day to do it again. Someone has to become the person who brings fire to other human beings and then figure out how to live with being that person. The official history of the Peleliu campaign notes that flamethrowers were crucial to reducing enemy cave positions. It mentions casualty ratios and operational efficiency. It doesn't mention Eddie Kowalski vomiting in the volcanic ash, or Ray Chen bleeding out in surgery, or Private Martinez learning to carry dragon fire on his back at age 18. Those stories aren't in the official history. They're in the gaps between the statistics, in the silence of men who came home but never fully left the Pacific, in the hospital records and divorce papers and death certificates of men who survived the war, but not the peace. War demands we do terrible things. Sometimes those terrible things are necessary. Sometimes they save lives, American lives at least, which was the only calculation that mattered on that coral ridge in September 1944. But necessity doesn't erase the cost. Effectiveness doesn't absolve the soul. And all the justified tactical decisions in the world don't change what it means to the young man from Pittsburgh who has to live with the memory of what he's done. The Japanese stopped laughing because they learned what fire could do. The Americans kept using fire because it worked. And Eddie Kowalski drank himself to death because he couldn't forget being the man who brought the two lessons together. That's the truth the reports don't capture. That's the cost the statistics don't measure. That's what happens when war turns men into weapons and then expects them to turn back into men when it's over. The flamethrower was effective. The flamethrower saved lives. The flamethrower was necessary. And Eddie Kowalski died 37 times between 1944 and 1963. Once for every day he carried it through the caves of Peleliu, until the alcohol finally completed what the fire started. That's the war the jungle remembers. That's the story behind the laughter that stopped.